little squeamish. You might want to skip this one. The house at the end of Old Mill Road has stood empty for nearly 20 years. The Death House, as it is now called, had once been the home of Carl Langford. Carl was the grave digger and coffin builder from the small town of Appleton, Virginia. He was from the old school of grave digging and would use a shovel and pick to hand dig each grave. 3 children filled Carl's home, as well as his heart, and he loved his wife Mavis as much as he did their 3 children. Carl Jr. was 7 and was considered the scholar of the family. Carl and Mavis would always make such a fuss over his report cards, which had consisted of mostly A's and B's. Robert, or Bubba, as everyone called him, was only 4, but he seemed the one most likely to carry on the business. Bubba dearly loved helping his father in the workshop Carl had turned his basement into. Then there was little Cindy, the Langford's only daughter, and the light of Carl's life. At only 3, Cindy's aptitude hadn't shown itself yet, but Carl knew for sure, with her natural blonde hair and lovely face, she would no doubt be a success. Carl walked into his house one day after a long grave digging session. Mavis noticed immediately that something was wrong. He had a crazed look about him, mad and determined. Mavis had never seen this look on her usually mild-mannered husband. "Where are the kids?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice, with a decidedly mean tone to it. "They're upstairs in their room." "Carl, what's wrong?" Carl didn't answer. He walked slowly into the kitchen and returned to the living room with a carving knife in his hand. "Upstairs," he commanded, pointing the knife at the stairway. "Carl? Now," I said. Mavis walked slowly and uncertainly over to the stairs and began to climb the 10 steps that led to the 2nd story of the house. She looked behind her in fear as Carl followed with the knife clutched firmly in his right hand. As they topped the stairs, Carl pointed the knife in the direction of their bedroom. A tilt of his head and an even meaner look caused her to obey his directions. "Get on the bed," Carl said through clenched teeth as he removed a length of clothesline cord from his back pocket. He used the cord to tie her wrists to the headboard. Then he tied her ankles in spread eagle fashion to either side of the footboard. Mavis sobbed as quietly as she could, hoping she wouldn't alarm the children. Carl stood beside the bed, and an evil smile crossed his face. He used the knife to slit her dress down its length and ripped it from beneath her, leaving her in her bra and panties. "Carl, please," she pleaded. "What is it? What has happened to you?" Ignoring her pleas, he walked slowly from the bedroom and down the short hallway to the children's room. "Hi, Daddy," said Cindy, looking up from the coloring book she had open on the floor. "Hi, Daddy," said the 2 boys in unison as they sat on the bottom bunk of the bunk beds they shared. They were playing with the action figures Santa had brought them for Christmas. Carl wasn't looking at the children with the love in his eyes that would normally be there. There was no prideful smile on his face. Without saying a word, he herded the children toward the bedroom. The children were shocked to see their mom tied to the bed. Cindy started to speak, but before she could finish what she was about to say, Carl yelled at her to shut up. He tied the children's feet and arms and placed a piece of duct tape over their mouths to quiet their sobs. He returned to the bedside, knife in hand, and began to strip the skin from the lower legs of his wife. Mavis screamed in pain as he continued his work. Carl cut a circle around her legs just below the knee and peeled the skin back like you skin a catfish. Blood began to soak into the sheets as he continued, first one leg and then the other, as her screams echoed off of the walls of the small room. After he had finished, he placed a piece of duct tape over her mouth to silence her pleas and quiet her screams. He sat down in the chair that sat in front of Mavis's vanity and lit a cigarette. He watched as tears streamed down the faces of his children, and Mavis squirmed in a desperate but futile attempt to free herself. When he had smoked as much of the cigarette as he wanted, he flicked the hot butt in the direction of the children, barely missing Cindy's face. He took the knife and stabbed Mavis several times in the side. The wounds were not meant to kill, but to torture. He then grabbed Bubba under his arm and lifted him up onto the end of the bed. Carl turned the boy to face his mother and put the knife into the boy's throat. A young deputy, Henry Clark, was the first officer on the scene. Laura Dixon had been hit by a car on Route 40 and had died from her injuries. When no one answered the phone at the Langford place, Henry had been sent out to investigate. It had been nearly 2 weeks before anyone had missed the family, and it had been hot that last week, with temperatures well into the 90s. The stench hit Henry as soon as he exited his patrol car. He was standing about 20 feet downwind of the house. He had his handkerchief out and over his mouth and nose by the time he reached the front porch. He tried the door, and it was not locked. When he swung the door open, what seemed to him to be at least 1 million flies took wing and scattered to the nearest window. Henry's first sight was Carl's naked and castrated body hanging completely motionless from a rope around his neck. Carl's rotting flesh was teeming with maggots in constant motion, wiggling and squiggling under what had remained of his flesh. Some of Carl's skull had become visible behind what was left of his face. The grisly scene caused Henry to flee the house. He stood at the corner of the house nearest his car and blew his undigested lunch all over Mavis Langford's prize-winning roses. After Henry composed himself, he called out the entire town. Police backup, ambulance, coroner, and Sheriff Harlan Crenshaw. Upstairs, the 3 bodies of Carl's children were piled up in reverse order to the order in which they had been killed. Their rotting skin crawled as maggots gorged themselves underneath. Bubba's throat had been cut, and apparently Carl had spun the boy over his head, as there were 2 distinct lines of blood spatter around the entire room. Carl Jr.'s arms and legs had been amputated like a butcher cut up a chicken. Cindy had had some kind of a fiendish autopsy performed on her, and her tiny vital organs lay in a rotting pile on the end of the blood-soaked bed. The air inside the house was black with buzzing flies. Every time someone would take a step, or make a move, the loudness of their buzzing would increase as even more flies would take wing and fill the air. A single fly landed on Henry's hand, and the thought of where it had been caused him to again visit the rose bush beside the house. It had taken nearly 2 weeks to complete the cleaning. Neither Carl nor Mavis had any other family, so the sheriff could find no next of kin to notify of the incident. The house had eventually come under the ownership of Dan Harriman's real estate company and has stood empty and unsold ever since. The house is now used by the younger children for target practice, and every window is broken. The other kids use it for Halloween parties and club initiations. It is said that every year, on the anniversary of the incident, Carl can be seen going through the motions the exact way he had done it all those years ago. The screams of his wife and children can be heard emanating from the empty house. The sound of the creaking rope against the wooden beam as Carl once again swings from the end of it. Finally, just before dawn, an ever-increasing buzzing sound.